Coming up today on The Story.
I started to see that, I was different, but I knew that there were other people out there that were different too. And I knew that I wasn't the only one. So I saw no one was being a voice for those people. No one was out there. No one was talking to kids like me saying, hey, this is who you are and that's okay. And I realized that no one else was doing it, so maybe it was my job to do it.
The Story.
G'day, I'm Jimmy Colefax. Welcome to The Story. Well, today we have part 2 of our conversation with Chloe Hayden and her mother, Sarah. Chloe's a young woman with Asperger syndrome who's also an advocate for young people diagnosed with Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD. Her mother, Sarah, joins us once again via the telephone from her office in Geelong, where she's a social worker specialising in autism. When we ended last time, Chloe had just entered her teens and was struggling trying to fit in at school and just knew that there was something different about herself. Meanwhile, as a parent, Sarah didn't really know what was going on and was a bit confused as to what was happening with her child. Now, we'll hear what happened next as Chloe and Sarah continue their conversation with Eric Scatterbo.
Chloe, boy, you were just very, very sad. You were contemplating life. What was it all about? You didn't know whether you wanted to have ever been born. Is that what you said?
Yes. So I think it was probably when I was 12, 13, start of year 7 is when it really started getting bad. I mean, I've known my entire life that I was different. I didn't know there was a name for it. I just knew I was different. And I knew that other kids didn't like different. Kids want people that fit in. Kids want people that are like them. And I wasn't like that. And, when you have no friends, nothing to call your own, there's, I think anyone would kind of, get into that same situation as, what's the point? Why am I here? Why, what sort of world is this? And I went through a lot of bullying, and that was kind of, I guess, the main thing that really ticked it over. And like Mum said, I went to 3 different schools. One of them was a private school, one of them was a public school, one of them was an agricultural farm school. So you could not get much further different than the 3 of them.
Yeah.
And that same problem persisted at every single one of those schools. I was so severely bullied to the point where I would make myself throw up in the mornings just so I had an excuse to stay home. Or if that didn't work, then I would hide in the bathrooms from literally 9 o'clock in the morning till 3:30 in the afternoon. And I wouldn't show up to any of the classes because I was so scared of not just the students, but also the teachers. They were both...
The teachers too?
Yeah, the teachers. In some points, the teachers were worse than the students. I guess because for other people your own age, you can kind of get into the mentality that they're also kids. They don't really know what they're talking about. But as a kid, especially as a kid that's struggling, the adults are the people that you look up to.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, like the adults are the ones that, especially teachers, when you haven't got your mum and dad there, the teachers are the ones that are meant to look after you and protect you. Yeah. And at a lot of times, the teachers would be the ones calling me names, or would be the ones that...
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Or they would leave me out, or if I didn't understand something, they would be, it doesn't matter, we have 20 other students here, one student doesn't matter, which is a mentality that a lot of people have, which is kind of sucky. It's not meant to happen.
Yeah, and Sarah, as a parent, you must have been very, very frustrated. Also, Chloe had health problems as well, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it was around about sort of year 7 when I guess everything just fell to pieces. And at first we thought it was the school we'd chosen, so we pulled her out, tried her with another school. A couple of months later, the same thing happened there, so we thought, must be the school again, pulled her out again. And third time, same thing happened no matter where she went. So it was around that time that, things just went from bad to worse. Chloe's mental health was rapidly declining. She'd gone from, a quirky, happy little kid who really, as I said earlier, didn't care about whether you were engaged in her and sharing her facts and whether she brushed her hair or whether she fit in with the crowd. And all of a sudden in year 7, there's such pressure, especially for girls, to fit in with the it crowd and know the latest bands and wear the latest, fashion. And Chloe just wasn't interested in any of that. And it was becoming more and more obvious that she was vastly different to these other girls. And unlike when she was little and she didn't really care about not fitting in, all of a sudden she desperately wanted to fit in but just had absolutely no idea how to do that. And I think her life really at school was becoming a living hell. Every single day she was bullied about her looks, about her interests, about her lack of social skills. And it just didn't seem to matter where we put her into school. Things just got worse and worse. She started starving herself, so she was on the path to anorexia. She was, permanently depressed. Her mental health was really bad. She wasn't getting enjoyment from the things that she used to get enjoyment from, and she was starting to identify, constantly that she was different, that she was, she referred to herself as an alien and a weirdo, and started regurgitating some of the things that the kids at school were saying to her. And this was becoming, constant. It was a real concern for myself and my husband that, here was this beautiful girl of ours that we could see all these amazing qualities, and we knew that she was a child of God and that she was created in His image and that she was exactly how she was meant to be, but she couldn't see that, and obviously none of the people around her were able to see it either. And I guess it's probably a good time to put in that was about that time that I actually got a teacher from the third school that we went to who said to me one day, I was down at the school dealing with yet another bullying incident that she was victim of, and this teacher pulled me aside and said, come and have a look in lost property, and you'll notice that every single thing in lost property belongs to your daughter, and come and have a look at the quality of her work and desk compared to all of the other kids. She was messy, she was chaotic, she was disorganised. She would come home without her school shoes. Do not ask me how that happens, that you can get a child come home without their school shoes.
Yeah.
But even things like her school shoes would be in lost property, and I sort of looked at this man, a little bit confused, and I said, I understand that she's having problems. And he said, no, do you not think that there might be something more going on? And I said, I was quite offended and sort of thought that he was insinuating that I wasn't a good parent, which I thought that I was an exceptional parent. And so I was a little bit confused, and I said, I don't understand what you mean. And he actually said to me, I think there's something more going on. I think my suggestion, if it was my child, would be to take her to a educational or developmental psychologist and get her assessed. And I said to him, get her assessed for what? And he just said, I think just go along and just find out what they think. And of course I found out later that he had picked up that she had Asperger's or autism immediately.
Oh, okay.
He told me later that he had a girl in a class the year before who was identical to Chloe, and he'd picked it up immediately and was gobsmacked to have a look at her file and see that she had no diagnosis. And so I've since found out that teachers aren't supposed to, tell parents this kind of stuff, but he obviously felt that it was important, and I'm very thankful that he did, because while it shocked and upset me, I sort of went home to my husband that night and I said, this teacher said that we should get her to a psychologist, which I was quite willing to do, because at that stage she was starting to not eat and she was, obviously very miserable. So I was thinking, well, obviously something's going on. We need to get her, to see a mental health professional just to even deal with that. So, that's where our journey to getting an autism diagnosis started.
Okay, Chloe, what happened? You went in, you talked to somebody, had some tests?
Mm-hmm. So the test itself, I don't remember exactly what the test was, but I just know that it went for a long time, and there was a lot of different IQ tests and memory tests and puzzles, and she would ask me questions or make me act out scenarios and stuff. And at this stage, I didn't go in going, I'm going in for an autism diagnosis, because I'd never heard that word before.
Yeah.
I just went in, did the things that the lady said, and we walked back out, and Mum was carrying this really thick book, and it had the word Asperger's across the front of it. And I didn't know what that was, and I thought it said asparagus, and I was like, what's going on? And I didn't know what it was, but we got into the car.
I have asparagus.
Literally, I went in, I was like, well, I don't know what's going on, but my mum's holding a book with the word vegetable on it, and she's crying. So I don't know what's going on, but it's probably not very good.
Yeah.
Because when you're a kid, if your parents are crying, the whole world is ending.
Oh, yeah.
Even now, if my mum or my dad are crying, I'm like, that's it, we're all dying, the world's over. Because that's the way, as a kid, that's the way your brain works. Your parents are the strong ones, your parents are the ones that are meant to.
Yeah, exactly.
And if they're crying over something to do with you, you're the one that's making the world end. So
you thought it was your fault?
I thought it was my fault. I didn't know what was going on. We just sat in the car, and Mum sat in the car park for a really long time. And she didn't speak to me, and I didn't speak to her. I just sat there going, oh, that's it, we're all going to die. She was just holding this big book, and she was crying, silent crying. And I was like, well, that's even worse than big loud crying.
Can we swing over to Sarah? What was going on for you at that moment?
So, Chloe, unfortunately and regretfully, Eric, her recollection is quite correct. I think, we'd had such a hellish few months, really, and we had, on the advice of the school, gone to a particular, very well-known, exceptional psychologist who specialises in developmental disorders and autism and things like that. And our initial appointment was quite a long one, because she was aware that we were going through some pretty major things, and that, our little girl was in a very bad way. And so, the initial appointment, it's for anyone who has had an autism diagnosis knows that it's a long, lengthy, usually months of testing. So that was just our first initial appointment, which was mainly really about getting the full developmental history and as I say now, ticking off all those boxes and looking back over the history, and just doing some brief testing with Chloe. And I mean, she looked at me at the end and she said to me, I already know what the diagnosis is, but obviously we need to do a formal assessment. And I said, okay, what's her diagnosis? And she turned around, and back then she said, Asperger's. And I said, asparagus? Like, what is this? And she explained to me, briefly what it was, and I just I was dumbfounded. I said, I've never even heard of it. I think that was the first time I'd actually ever heard that word. And she said, look, I'll give you this book. It's, it was like the Bible of Asperger's kind of book. It was like the A to Z of everything. And she said, take this home. I'll see you next week, and we'll start the formal assessment. But I can already tell you now that I know that that's what it's going to be. I have no doubt at all. And so, of course, I'm, a mum who's just been told that my child has got, this thing that I've never heard of. So I wasn't sure, was it something to be fearful of? What was life going to look like for her? If I, have I just received a diagnosis that means that my child is never going to become the child that I thought that she was going to be? And of course, all of these things are going on, in my mind. And I'm sitting there with a child beside me who was already in a really bad mental state, and me sitting there, having a total panic attack because my kid's just been potentially diagnosed with something that I've never heard of. So it was, it probably wasn't my finest parenting moment of...
But very understandable. I mean, any parent in your situation can identify with what you're going through. Yeah.
I think it was the fear of the unknown at that stage. I and thankfully I've been able to turn that around and use it now for me, professionally, to look back and go, if I could tell myself and Chloe something in that moment, it would be that nothing had actually changed. She was still the same Chloe, and we were just getting a name for what she'd always been. And, that night we drove home. We were an hour from home because we had to drive to Warrnambool, which was an hour away from our home, to start the assessment process. And I think we drove home sort of in silence, with Chloe miserable and me miserable and wondering, what on earth. But I went to bed that night, and I can remember I laid awake for hours and hours, and I literally read cover to cover of this book. And I remember just thinking, oh my gosh, how did I not know about this? And of course then I'm Googling everything in it, and I'm just thinking, wow, like I knew 100% that day that is exactly what she had.
You're listening to The Story. Today, Eric Scatterbo is once again chatting with Chloe Hayden and her mother, Sarah. As we've been hearing, Chloe was diagnosed with Asperger syndrome when she was a teenager. Next, we'll hear how Chloe has gone on to become an advocate for young people diagnosed with Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD. All that and more when we return.
The Story.